Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are tuning in from all around the world. My name is Kate Quinn, and I'm one of the co-conveners of the seminar series, along with my colleagues, Professor Gad Human and Dr. Steve Cushion. And I'm really pleased to be able to welcome tonight our speaker, Aïda Roumer. And I'll just do a very brief introduction and hand straight over to Aïda. And just to let you know, as usual, if you want to ask a question, you can put it in the chat at any time. And during the Q&A, you can raise your hand, use the raise hand function. So without further ado, Aïda Roumer is an engaged scholar who focuses on the political economy of emancipatory struggles, notably on the Haitian-Dominican border. After studying political economy of development at SOAS, she's currently completing her doctoral thesis at the University of Frankfurt. As a member of Kolektif Choublak, chair of the Haiti Support Group, which is where I think I first met you, and co-chair of, and apologies if my German pronunciation is terrible, of the Deutsch-Haitianische Gesellschaft, Aïda wants to increase the visibility of grassroots initiatives in Haiti and to organize the Haitian diaspora in Europe. And having heard several of her talks before in various contexts, I'm very excited to hear this latest one, which is called Coloniality in Kiskeya, Organizing on the Haitian-Dominican Border. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Kate, for this introduction. I'm really happy to be speaking in this context, and thank you for inviting me. Thank you also for inviting so broadly, because I have done quite a poor job at inviting everybody, and yet I see some very familiar faces and names. So I'm really happy to have you all here. Family, both Roumer family and beyond academic family. So the title of my presentation is Coloniality in Kiskeya, Organizing on the Haitian-Dominican Border. And it's based on the work that I've been doing as part of my PhD research, where I'm investigating the underlying distribution of power across the border, specifically at the border crossing between the cities Dajabón and Wanament in the northern part of the island. And I will start my presentation in a second, but just to, introduce the research that I'm doing, and then the presentation is still something a little bit different. In my research, my main question is, or the driver of the research is, to better understand which underlying dynamics produce and perpetuate patterns of trade and social relations, which we can observe to be highly interdependent on the border, but also highly unequal. So let me share my screen, and I hope it works, but it did work before, so it should be fine. Right. So this image is of a stencil that I saw at the Portal Cultural in Santo Domingo, and it shows the United States of Kiskeya, which is a utopia that I will not be speaking about in great depth in this presentation, but it is one that I need to remind myself from time to time. And it's also helpful to remind myself that others, such as the Mashi Mashi Collective, which you can also find on Instagram at Dispararte, you can see it at the top right of this image, that this is also a utopia that others strive towards, an island without border. So let me set the scene. Haitians are currently facing extreme violence, both politically and materially. Internally, 1.5 million Haitians are displaced, faced with the insecurity in Port-au-Prince, anti-Haitianism in the Dominican Republic, and deportations from the US and beyond, which all force Haitians to abandon their homes. And in a similar way, the economic violence that Haitians face is apparent both internally, for example, through the segregation of peasant and city populations, the extreme inequality within the country, and the precarious, low-paid work that Haitians are carrying out across the Caribbean and Abya Yala, the Americas. Of course, there are attempts to change the situation as it exists, and both at the individual and institutional levels, these attempts seem doomed to fail. So individuals within Haiti, for most, but then also from the diaspora and beyond, establish, for example, civil society organizations, social enterprise, humanitarian initiatives to improve the status quo. Binational programs as well, funded by institutions such as the European Union or humanitarian relief organizations or trade agreements set up bilaterally, are all established in the name of balancing the playing field. And for now, let's take this at face value. Let's assume that the intent really is to create this level playing field. What we observe is that the systemic injustice persists and failure to reach said balance in the playing field runs across all initiatives. And so at the individual level of trying again and again to build and then rebuild and rebuild, this recurring failure creates frustration, and those who can end up leaving the country. And then on a larger scale, what we have, I assume, all observed is, for example, the disastrous impact of the post-earthquake response in 2010, which further deepened dependency, violence, and suffering in Haiti, and was a lesson even for the most progressive individuals and organizations. They tried and failed. And I recommend, for anyone who hasn't watched the movie yet, the documentary Fatal Assistance, Assistance Mortelle, by director Raoul Peck. So numerous examples of failures: the UN introducing the cholera after the earthquake, the Red Cross workers embezzling funds, Oxfam workers organizing a sex ring, Brazilian blue helmets fathering children and leaving, and of course the US further expanding its influence. So beyond these examples of intentional harm that I just mentioned, my question is, what's going on? And my argument that I want to make here is twofold. So firstly, I argue that the power relations that are underpinning this violence emanate from the coloniality of power, as Quijano uses it, and therefore reproduce colonial hierarchies and norms and modes of production, especially capitalist modes of production, which can be observed as perpetual and systemic violence against Haitians. And I'm sure that many of the same patterns you will know from your regional contexts within the Caribbean and beyond. Secondly, I argue that these experiences of violence and oppression can shift, but only where the underlying power relations are shifting, due to, for example, changing political and material conditions. And so my question then is, where do these underlying power relations change? Where can we observe outcomes that may be slightly different to the failures that we know so well? And the question is, how do we understand, recognize, or even create moments that are favorable for change? So in this presentation, I would like to focus on examples where I think we can see examples of resistance, cracks in the wall of coloniality, as Catherine Walsh says, which are worth investigating because they may tell us more about potential shifts in power balances and dynamics that are underpinning them. So to begin, let me set the scene in terms of addressing the coloniality in Kiskeya. And of course, my presentation isn't moving. Great, you haven't missed much. So the focus of my research and what I will be talking about today is the border crossing between Wanament and Dajabón, which you can see on the map. So the northern part of the island. And the first thing to note is that anti-Blackness is a fundamental component of modern Dominican national identity. And work is being done on this from within the Dominican Republic as well. So here are some examples of Dominican publications, both influencing the academic discourse, but also the social media discourse, the popular discourse on the relationship of Dominican national identity to Blackness and then Haitianness. And another one that I want to point out is the militaristic symbolism that is pervasive, especially on the border. So there's a strong military presence and a normalization of militarization and militaristic appearance across all spheres of life, like, for example, in church. So, of course, this history of the Haitian-Dominican border relations is European history. And its shifts and reconfigurations are tied to the power relations and the political processes which led British, French, Spanish, German, Polish settlers and indentured laborers to colonize the island of Haiti, Boyo, Kiskeya, in the 15th century. So the fight against Queen Anacaona, the extermination of the indigenous Taino people, the establishment of plantation economies, and the extraction of wealth through the labor force of dehumanized enslaved people from Western and Central Africa mostly, laid the foundational norms and rules. In this, I term them, or I use the political economy terminology of institutions, norms and rules, that structure Western thought and have structured Western integration into the world system. So Dominican anti-Blackness is European anti-Blackness. And we observe this or it crystallizes in violent anti-Haitian policies with deportations of up to 10,000 people per week. That's the stated goal. And these occur multiple times a day at the border. So this is just the crossing that I have been spending a lot of time at, and it's a very normal scene to see. I don't know if the video translates well to your screens, but you see trucks full of people being dropped at the border and pushed back into Haiti, oftentimes based on racial profiling that happened. And so whether or not they are Haitian-born, Dominican-born, of Haitian descent or not, they will find themselves in Haiti if they cannot eminently prove or produce a birth certificate. It also crystallizes this anti-Blackness and ethno-national identity in the 1937 massacre, which is, of course, again, directly linked to European fascism, which Director Trujillo admired when he aimed to whiten the border. And here I recommend both the documentary, photography, and film of Pierre-Michel Jean, who interviewed or managed to interview some of the survivors of the 1937 massacre, and the way that they are dealing with this memory or this oblivion, this being forgotten by the Haitian government as much as by history. So in my examples or my quest to find examples of resistance, I'm focusing also on another form of coloniality on the border, and that is the economic, the capitalist division of labor, which keeps precarious, low-wage menial labor to Haitians, whilst more stable, high-income jobs are generally carried out by Dominicans. And on the border, that becomes very apparent. So there's many historical cases of Haitian labor first working in Bate, in the sugarcane plantations, etc. But they are often far away from cities. You have to intentionally travel there to see. Whereas on the border, it becomes very apparent. And I will focus on three examples. The first one here is the CODEVI, a free trade zone for textile manufacturing. The second is the example of the binational market, which is an informal market, partly established or supported by the European Union. and then the example of the Canal Pas Compris project. So first here, the CODEVI, as an example of a formal employment sector, and therefore also an example of people organizing within the formal sector. So the CODEVI was established by Grupo M in 2004, led by entrepreneur Fernando Capellan. It was partially funded by the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is the private lending arm of the World Bank. And it employs generally precarious Haitian labor force. There are exceptions. That is sewing in the plants, and then Dominican management. And they produce textiles ordered by international firms. And then, because of its use of Haitian labor force, the CODEVI, everything that's produced in the CODEVI gets preferential access to the United States market under the Hope Help Treaty. The Hope Help Treaty is one of these binational treaties, which Trump just extended for another year. And so this is the incentive that is created to use Haitian labor force in your production line, in your production chain, so that you then also get preferential access to the United States market. And as you can see, talking about coloniality, the imagery that is being used is very clearly evokes like this brand managed image. You can see the Dominican management and then some very, I would say, staged images of a happy mother with her child working in this factory. And then on the other side, you have the example of how the then ambassador of the European Union to the Dominican Republic visited the CODEVI, saying that the development of the border area has a direct impact on peace and stability of the island. So it is a wonderful example of binational cooperation. Now, the thing is that in this specific instance, the then ambassador to the Dominican Republic, the Haitian ambassador, was not even invited to this momentous event. And this is just to show that the coloniality is embedded within these kinds of enterprises. And it's the kind of sidelining of Haitian responsible figures that is being told again and again. Now, what is interesting, or what needs to be said, is that there is an ambiguity, because the reality is that the work provided by the CODEVI is a formal employment that evokes much desire within the Haitian working class, and for good reason. It creates stability, and there is a certain interdependency within the plant itself, which actually increases the bargaining power of the Haitian labor force. So, for instance, when unions within the CODEVI managed in the early 2000s to unionize and to create some public attention, they managed to force the World Bank to agree to minimum employment standards and mandatory unionization. And they had to actually integrate this mandatory unionization and these employment standards into all their contracting of the private IFC lending arm. At the same time, brands that were worried about their brand image, such as Levi's and The Gap, pulled out of the CODEVI. So there is an example of successful unionization and organization within this plant, even though it is set up in a very predictably colonial or capitalist hierarchical way. So I think that this showcases that, for example, in export processing zones where investors are not tied to the location, a moment of unionization would have led to simply investors pulling out and relocating to another part of the world. But because this plant is set up by a Dominican firm and Dominicans will also benefit from it remaining where it is, there's a certain bargaining space that starts to appear. The second example is that of the binational market, which is the most important informal market for individual traders on the border, along the border. So there's many, many people who are depending on this market for their income and subsistence. And here, there are other forms of resistance. So in this context, because this market takes place on the Dominican side of the border, on the Dominican side of the Massacre River, even playing Haitian music becomes an act of resistance. I hope you can hear. And I've taken this video because it is actually very rare to hear compa music, Creole music in Dajabón. And that already is drawing attention in a way that needs to be understood as being intentional. And here again, the interdependence of the border population and the dependence on the binational market for subsistence makes for its political relevance. So the border is oftentimes used as a means of economic pressure. And in high stakes diplomatic scenarios, when a decision needs to be made from either of the administrations from Wanament or Dajabón, or when there has been a significant incident, such as a crime, then either Haitians or Dominican administrative forces may decide to close the border to exert pressure on the other administration. So if the border is closed, the market doesn't take place, which means that there will be grievances across the border populations. And this creates pressure on decision makers to bend to demands. And this is also important to know that on the Dominican side of the border, that part of the Dominican Republic is also structurally disadvantaged. So it is a population that is equally very much dependent on the economic exchange and business with Haiti. So here is an example of a day where the border was closed and Haitians welded down the gate and put all their demands, their political demands, on the front of the gate and then proceeded to repaint it. Something that I have cropped is that the image on the right-hand side actually also shows a woman returning into Haiti after having been deported. So she's the last person to enter Haiti from the Dominican Republic on that day via this gate. And another example of the importance of understanding the power distribution when setting up projects is exemplified by this image, which is actually the second market hall of the binational market. And it was funded by the European Union in an attempt to level the playing field, so that Haitian merchants would also have a possibility to sell uh, on the Haitian side of the border. And this was the day, I took this picture on the day that it was meant to be opened. The opening had been pushed back many times. And it just goes to show that if the underlying power dynamics are not conducive to a change in the way this market can operate, then people will be forced and decide to continue crossing into the Dominican Republic to sell their goods, knowing that if they sell on the Haitian side, nobody will come and buy their merchandise. And talking about intent, here again, I would like to highlight that I have not yet addressed, or I don't intend in this presentation to address intentional mismanagement. So there is a person that was employed to see this project through, whose livelihood and career progression depended on this project being completed, and yet it is not completed. So here is an example of these demands both being carried into the public sphere, but also formal workers on strike voicing their demands, addressing their demands both towards the Dominican government and a change in how the market, the binational market, is managed, but also voicing their discontent with the Haitian state, Haitian government. And so this leads me to the third example of resistance, which I would like to address, and which is quite particular in that it stands out as a very unique form of collective power and organization, which has also activated the Haitian diaspora like never before since the earthquake of 2010, which is the Canal Campe project, which is a canal built from the Massacre River, so the river that runs along the border, the Haitian-Dominican border. And that was designed in agreement with both the Dominican and Haitian governments, but was later contested by the Dominican government for diplomatic reasons. And so the Haitian state ended up buckling under pressure and revoked the construction rights for the canal. But then the Haitian people continued to build, even though they had a Dominican military ready to enter Haitian territory and the police from Port-au-Prince that had come down to stop them in their work. And so the canal has now partially been completed and irrigates the Artibonite Plains. Again, there are many conflicting dynamics even within this project. The rice that is being produced is too expensive to be afforded by the everyday Haitians who would want to buy local, and is instead exported. And so the underlying power dynamics, of course, influence this project as well. But I think that these examples can show that when looking at the instances or the examples where change does happen or where people are able to voice their concerns and organize without being instantly shut down, it is worth questioning what conditions made this kind of resistance possible. And I would like to make a final reference to, because I think it's also maybe relevant for us to understand the current discourse and the current sentiments of Haitians towards their government and the political crisis that we're finding ourselves in, is that really the state itself is a proof of the coloniality on Kiskeya, right? And actually, in terms of how the Haitian state was set up, it was set up in a way where people don't actually take part in any or feel any attachment to the state as such. So I will wrap it up here. And I would be really happy to get your questions and reflections. I will try to also answer questions relating maybe to the changes since 7th of February. But we will stop the recording so that you can speak freely, and I'd be happy to just have an informal chat. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that great and very clear overview of